Welcome back to Pursuing Justice. I'm Harriet Hendel, and today we are pleased to have our guest, John Patterson, with us. John is on the board of directors of the Innocence Project of Florida, an organization, as you listeners know, very close to my heart. He is a partner in Schutz and Bowen law firm, which deals in commercial real estate, banking, and business law. And John was also former president of the Florida Bar Foundation and on the board of the Florida Bar Foundation for 10 years. Thank you, John, for giving us your precious time today. I do appreciate it. And thanks for being our guest.
Well, thank you, Harriet. My pleasure.
Welcome. So one of the things I wanted to ask you, among many, is how did you choose your profession?
Well, it was an interesting journey. At first, I wanted to be an engineer and then an architect. And then as I was in high school, I had friends whose parents were lawyers, and that was in the 60s, late 50s and early 60s. And several of those people, and this was in the South, took some pretty courageous stands to take a position on integration and race relations that really bucked the white audience at the time, the white community. And I thought, that's really gutsy. So that started me thinking about a lot of things. And that was it. I decided I wanted to be a lawyer.
But you specialize in commercial real estate and banking, et cetera. So why that and not maybe something different in the law?
Well, I started out, Harriet, doing a lot of different things. I did divorce work. I did trials. I did appeals. And it was really, I really wanted to be a trial lawyer and an appellate lawyer. And that's what I did for the early part of my practice. But I always liked business. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for small business people, and they are the biggest employers in the country. They make things work. They get things done. And so my wife bought a business when we were very young. She was very successful in it. So I gravitated towards that, but I did trial work in that field, less domestic relations, more in terms of commercial trial work. Mm-hmm. And then finally, I stopped doing trial work about 6 years ago.
I see. And the reason that I thought you would be a wonderful guest today is that your path has brought you to the Innocence Project of Florida. Now you're a new member of the board of directors. How far back were you aware of the Innocence Project of Florida and the work that they did?
Back to the inception, which I believe at least Innocence Project in Florida was 2003, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct. That is correct.
And I knew Sandy Dallenberg, who was the founding director, from a number of different things. And he was somebody that I really admired till his death. I believe it was last year.
It was.
And so I knew the work that was being done. Two of my partners in the firm that I was with before Schutz and Bowen for 40 years did criminal law or had criminal law background and experience. So in one of the key cases in criminal law, my partner, Charlie Livingston, had taken that case all the way to the United States Supreme Court. It was the right of prisoners to have access to law libraries while in prison. And so I was aware of the issues. I was aware of what can happen and what can go wrong. So I, of course, followed that, and I was on the board of the Bar Foundation, which was the principal funder of the Innocence Project, was and is.
That's correct.
So,
right.
Yeah, so I've followed it throughout. My focus was on civil access to justice, but I was certainly aware of the issues in criminal access to justice and in the what happens apart from access to justice and the when things go wrong. And that's what the Innocence Project is about. Not only when things go wrong, but how do you prevent things from going wrong? What are the best practices? You'll always have, I don't care how good the system is and how well it's funded, you're going to always have miscarriages of justice that will occur. It's a very human endeavor, and we're, of course, humans, and we're fallible. So it's important to have organizations like the Innocence Project that can find when we have these miscarriages, when things go wrong, even in the best of systems, and do our best to right those wrongs.
That's true. Now, before 2003, when the Innocence Project of Florida began, if you went farther back than that, were you aware that there were people in prison who were innocent and shouldn't be there?
Well, sure. You would certainly, as a lawyer, you'd almost have to be brain dead not to know that. And miscarriages of justice have occurred from the beginning. In the United States, elsewhere, they happen. Sure.
Mm-hmm. Well, interesting you say that, though, because in the reading I've done when I teach classes about the criminal justice system, there was a belief, I don't exactly know how far back, but say before Barry Scheck stepped up to the plate in 1992 when he formed the first Innocence Project in the country, that there weren't that many people in prison who were innocent. Most of them were guilty. So a very small, tiny minority. And I think that has shifted in terms of a belief system in this country, certainly now.
I think that...
Go ahead.
In Tallahassee, and that's part of the Deep South. I lived there until I went to college. I went to college in North Carolina. I've never lived. I went to basic training in North Carolina. I've never lived any particular period of time outside of the South. So the real focus of my attention in terms of the criminal law system and where it goes wrong is in the racial disparities that occur. And, you have one of those white hot cases with racial overtones, alleged black on white rape. Things can go very wrong in those. And you almost have to be oblivious to history not to realize that, even growing up.
Where did you grow up, John?
I was born in Tallahassee, and I lived there until I was 18. Then I went to Duke University and spent 4 years there, and then back to Florida. So that's
were you aware of racism in various forms as you grew up or when you went to college?
Oh, well, of course you're aware of it. I was aware of it. I was really reshaping my views to when I was in high school, that in a way that did not reflect either my parents' views or most of my friends. I had come to the conclusion it was wrong. When I got to college, I was my views on that accelerated and perhaps matured. One of my good friends in college was a guy by the name of Harry Boyd. Harry's father was on Martin Luther King's staff, and Harry got me involved in the civil rights movement, or didn't get me involved. I volunteered. So I was active in voter registration, and I was the president of the Duke chapter of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and was active in civil rights work in college. So yeah, I very much knew what was going on, and I in the course of that, one of the things we were doing was voter registration work in eastern North Carolina, and so I was a foot soldier. I was going door to door, knocking on doors, trying to get people to register. And then there were the professional soldiers who were the lawyers. They were law students and professors, good number of them. They are from Georgetown University College of Law. And one of the organizers of the whole effort there, African-American couple, the Johnsons, were business people there. Well, actually, he was. Reed was a business person, and his wife was a teacher. She got fired for her activities. She sued, and if you Willa Johnson versus, I've forgotten who the defendant was, but her case went all the way to the Federal Court of Appeal before her wrongful termination was overturned. So I could see the positive power of law and lawyers as advocates for people's rights, fundamental rights, and
that's a very, very good point you make about the law, that if we can't legislate a change, then where are we? If we have some teeth in the law, that really makes all the difference. You mentioned the Florida Bar Foundation, and I wanted you to tell us more about what that group does and your role in the foundation.
Well, let's take the first part of it. What does the foundation do?
Right.
It's a long story, but let me really get to perhaps the modern history of the Florida Bar Foundation. And it's over 50 years old. And the Bar Foundation has three missions. It's primarily access to justice. And in order to achieve that, there are three prongs to that. One is the funding of legal aid organizations, of which there are about 23 local organizations throughout the state. Every region of those 23 regions, every one has a legal aid organization, some more than one. And so there is access to justice through a legal aid program everywhere in Florida, in some measure. So in order to fund those programs, the principal source of the funds are from lawyers' short-term trust accounts. There's roughly $4.5 billion held by lawyers in the state of Florida in short-term trust accounts. Now, that money used to generate a lot of funds. At the peak in about 2007, it was roughly $70 million a year. However, the interest rates have plummeted, as everyone knows, so that really shrank to less than $5 million a year from 70.
Wow.
And that's caused a funding crisis with legal aid organizations, not only in Florida, but throughout the country.